Well, Teresa, how are you doing? Welcome to the podcast today.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. Excited to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to this conversation. What you do is rather interesting, so I'm sure my audience will gain a lot of insights from our conversation today.
Hopefully.
If not, well, we'll just maybe 30 minutes at the No, I'm sure it'll be great. So, I'd love to ask my guest this question. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I think in life, the best piece of advice I've ever received was from my mother, who used to always say, "This too shall pass."
I used that a lot when I was in school.
I think you need to know in life and in business that you get stuck in a situation that emotionally, mentally, and physically, you have to put it in perspective that this too shall pass.
Yes, it's come along quite useful for me in my life. Especially during those very difficult times when it's like, this is the worst possible time in my life, and somebody else reminded me, this too shall pass. So I love that. I'm always curious about people like yourself who are successful and achieve the level of success. Who are some people in your life who serve to either be an inspiration to you or a mentor for you along your journey?
Again, it would be a parent. Definitely my dad. When I was first contemplating opening a business, or he was kind of pushing me. I said, Dad, I left home at 15. What do I know? I'm a kid who learned by street smarts. Who am I to open a business? People won't like me. They're not going to like the competition. And he said, stop. Quit being a little girl about it and be a businesswoman.
I love that.
He said, little girls want everyone to like them. They want to be patted on the head and told they're doing a good job or a good thing. He said, business women change the world. Little girls don't.
Ooh, I like that. Another great.
A family of quarters.
There you go. Just like Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan. Lots of quotes.
That's right. That's right.
You mentioned starting a business. I'm curious for you, what are some of the biggest challenges you face in early days of your business, and how did you overcome them?
I think, the whole imposter syndrome, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but it was definitely true with me. I didn't receive my education in a traditional way. I was on my own as a teenager for many years. I felt like the non-traditional ways that I achieved my education and became an interpreter was not, it wasn't really good enough. And then, who was I to say that I could start a business? So a lot of personal, mental things. And then there were things like getting startup money. They wanted my husband at the time to come in and sign a $1,000 loan.
So,
Those are some of the things that pushed me back and that were the real stumbling blocks. And I think sometimes we get in our own way, in our own head about what we can and what we can't achieve.
So as you face those obstacles, how did you overcome them? Because those are things that you have to find a way around and to navigate. How did you, especially with the land thing, how did you have that work out?
Well, I only needed $5,000 was all I wanted at the time. American Express had sent me a little notice that they were giving out $5,000 lines of credits to new businesses. And it was kind of like a checkbook that they sent out. I was like, I thought I had just arrived because I even had an American Express. No, they were offering me startup. That's the business. So in that sense, as far as what I physically needed to start the business, and I started out of my home, that was the venue that I went to after the situation at the bank. But I think I actually was exposed to sign language in my church by a pastor who was pastor for the deaf people that came in one Sunday, and they signed a song. And I got very intrigued and very interested. And I started taking sign language classes and eventually went to college to become a sign language interpreter. But I always had it in the back of my mind that this is what I was destined to do. This is what I was supposed to do. So it's a big responsibility and a privilege, but it's something that keeps pushing you forward, or at least it did me.
I just have a special place in my life for people who sign, because I met my wife as a seminary because she was taking sign language. And so that's how we actually met. So I always have a unique place in my heart for people who sign.
Yeah, it's a beautiful language. It's hard not to fall in love with it.
It is. And I also found that when I was going to seminary, they were the most welcoming group of people when I walked in. And it was just so nice because they just accepted you and weren't judgmental. And so it was just neat to be in their midst.
It's interesting, I've learned through my studies that an entrance to different cultures starts with you learning or accepting their language. And in the beginning, my business was just sign language interpreting, but now we offer over 200 spoken language interpreters. And it really runs across the board that is an entrance to being accepted into someone's culture. You and I were talking in the beginning about me living in the middle of Philadelphia. It's a different culture being in the city than it is in the suburbs. And when I moved here, I learned it's a different language. It's different
Yes.
traditions. It's a different life. And you have to become part of it and accept it in order to be accepted.
And you have to learn the lingo. When I moved to Milwaukee, for example, I had to learn what a bubbler was. I'd never heard of a bubbler, which is just a waterfall for those who are not from Milwaukee. But yeah, you had to learn to fit in. You had to take the time to be curious and to be a detective, to figure out what is the culture around you, what's the pace around you, and how you adapt and to change. Sports teams has I couldn't walk around with my Steelers hat on in Philadelphia, probably.
No. When I moved here from New York, my son warned me, your Giants paraphernalia and all of your Yankees, you better keep it in the closet because Philadelphians are serious. So now I have my Eagles gear.
There you go, right?
And I know what a Jean is. So yeah, I've learned to adapt.
You learn to adapt. I'm curious. I really want to have one because I want a new book out. What inspired you to write The Language of Success, an Interpreter's Entrepreneurial Journey?
All my life, I've had people say to me after they get to know me a little bit, your life is so amazing. You should write a book. And all my life, I thought my life is such a mess that these people want to rubberneck and find out how I got from A to B to Z. So just because I have a different journey. But when I moved to Philadelphia, I joined the Union League, which is a private club. I think it's one of the biggest, oldest in the country. And I joined a lot of the business clubs. And at one of the business clubs, I was asked to speak. They asked people to speak about their industry. And for the first time ever, I really was honest about my background. I guess it just gets to the age where like, they're going to love me or hate me. I'm not going to gloss over this. I'm going to tell the truth. And the response was overwhelmingly, and in the audience, there was a book editor who came up to me and said, you should write a book. And it's the first time I thought, well, maybe people aren't just wanting to see what a train wreck I was, and that they actually would like to understand how I got from a 15-year-old on her own to business owner. So with her help over a couple of years, I wrote the book.
Wow, that's so neat. I've written a book myself. I'm curious for you, what were some of the challenges you faced in writing this book, and how did you overcome those?
I think the biggest challenge was I was not expecting the time that it would take to write a book. And I love to write, and I've written all my life. My son writes books. I had a grandmother who wrote. I'm like, okay, so every Saturday and Sunday I'll write for like 6 hours. And I found out you just don't sit down and force yourself to write or be creative in that time block. So that was a real struggle for me. I don't know how you felt when you were writing, but I couldn't get more than 3 hours. My brain was fried.
Right. I used to go to Starbucks, and I would go after I dropped my kid off at school. I'd get my favorite Starbucks drink, pumpkin spice latte or cinnamon Johto latte, and I would put on my headphones and I would play the same song every single day. It was running on a loop, so I'd have to worry about singing it, but it blocks out everything else. And I would sit down and I would try to knock out 2.5 hours. And I would walk away just completely exhausted for the next single day. But if I didn't do it every day, there's no way I could, like you just talked about. I mean, I couldn't imagine trying to sit down and say Saturday and Sunday, I'm going to, crank out 3 hours.
Listen to Smooth Jazz Essentials and Apple Playlist at least 2,000 times. Like you said, same thing over and over so that you can just keep writing. It's another interesting point you bring up about writing. You can't put in like, I run a lot and I can't put in my run playlist or I can't put in
Right.
something. You've got to have that playlist that lets you still be creative and have that in the background. So I'm interested, what was your playlist or what did you listen to?
So it's going to sound really crazy because it's probably, I was writing a Christian book, but it was not a Christian song. So
Oh,
it was a song by Chainsmokers. And it just had
okay.
a tune that was just repetitive. And I just played it over and over again because I could ignore it.
Uh,
So
yeah.
I just looped it over and over again, and I could just sit down and didn't think about it and just blocked everything else out. So yeah, it was productive. It took me a while, but I got it done. And then it was like, then came the hard part of I'm running with it. Now I didn't trust it. It's like, do I really want to share this much of an autobiography about you? I was like, do I want to share this much about me? Do I want people knowing this story? Am I being too transparent? Am I not being transparent enough? So all of those questions right in terms of mind as you get a book out, especially when it has so much of you in it.
Yeah, such a great point because I felt like, against my editor's advice, I felt like I had to start at 15. That's where my journey started. Because what me being on my own in those teenage years and all those life of minimum wage jobs for so long is what really formed me and really built the business model that I use for my business today. It needed to be told. But then I found out afterwards, one of my fears came true, and that is people know too much about you.
Right.
And then sometimes you get some creepy things that are said to you, like, I read your book.
Yeah,
And you're like, oh God, what are they referring to? What part of the book?
exactly. No, that's so key. I looked at your book and I spent some time with it, and I kind of ran across there were some key themes and lessons in your book. I think the one that kind of sticks out to me right away was resilience and determination. You talk about in your journey from a challenging upbringing to building a successful business, the importance of you talk about resilience a lot. Kind of share with us a little bit of that key lesson you want to bring out in the book.
I think it kind of goes back to this too shall pass.
Yeah.
I've gone through things in my life. Now I've had journeys with cancer. I've had journeys with abuse, other things. And people say, how did you get through this? Oh, you're so courageous. You're really not. You put one foot in front of the other. You don't have a choice. I mean, I guess you could curl up and die, but I had my first child at 19. So I was a very young mother and I had a child to support. And before that, I had to put food in my mouth and a roof over my head. And my dad used to say, hunger's a great motivator. And it is. I mean, I think sometimes in life, we take that away from our kids and our younger generation of that motivation of hunger and how are you going to feed yourself? How are you going to pay your bills? And I think you just keep moving forward. I don't know how else to describe it except that I never knew that I had an option to just stop and give up.
That makes sense. You also emphasize in your book the value of trusting your instincts and seizing opportunities. Tell us a little bit about that, Ezra, because I think what separates ordinary people, I would say, from entrepreneurs is that idea of intuition and opportunity.
I think you have to be very gutsy to seize opportunities sometimes. Probably the biggest pivotal point in my business was when I bid on a large government contract and I actually didn't go after it. I had someone call me and say, we've been using your services. There's this big RFP out. Why aren't you bidding on it? We were hoping that you would bid on it. And it was due in 3 days. And I was like on my computer as I'm talking to them, looking up RFP. I had no idea what it even was. And I'm like, oh, I can do this. Well, 3 days later, I lived in my office for 3 days. I had to call my accountant and attorney and insurance broker and get all the help I could. But I put it out there and it changed my life. It changed my business because I was awarded the contract and then I'm like, I can do this. And then I've been on more and more contracts. I was no longer this little business of just a bookkeeper. I was hiring more and more people and growing. So I think it becomes almost addictive. You're like, okay, where's the next opportunity? Is it over here? Is it over here? What am I going to do? And I think listening to your gut is so important. The times that I made huge mistakes in my personal and business life was when I didn't listen to my gut. I didn't listen to the red flags. Um, I think that's one piece of advice I tell other entrepreneurs that are starting out when they say, what can you tell me? And like, you've got to not care what other people think, number one. You've got to want to be respected. Don't worry about being liked as much as being respected, and just trust your gut.
I love this quote that's in your book. Success is not built on success, it's built on failure. It's built on frustration. Sometimes it's built on catastrophe. So how did you learn from struggles in your life and your business to kind of build on that to the next thing you're working on?
I'm sorry, could you say that last part again, Keith?
How did you use the struggles that you ran across in business to empower you to the next level?
Struggling through things like COVID comes to mind right away. When COVID hit, I was determined that I was not going to lay people off. And through that struggle, I had to give up some things that were really important to me. And the one thing that I had was I had bought a small condo townhouse type thing in North Carolina near my son, his family there. And it was really precious to me because it allowed me to be there with them. But it was an asset. I knew that if I sold it, I could get through at least a year of payroll, and I did. And it made me feel like a failure, honestly, because it made me feel like a failure to my family. It made me feel like maybe I'd done the wrong thing and I should have just let people get unemployment. I was trying to do the right thing. That was like such a big struggle for me during that time, and I had a lot of self-doubt. But on the other side of that, I found that I found I could look at myself in a mirror. I felt better about the business. My employees were incredibly loyal and stuck by me. And ironically, we can't look into the future. Only God knows that. But ironically, my son and daughter-in-law ended up moving into a better place, a lovely place. They're still in North Carolina, but it kind of I would have been selling it anyway. So I think through struggles, you learn sometimes the thing that you're struggling with the most and you feel the worst about, it just turns out to be almost a moot point.
Yeah, I love that. What a great story. What lesson do you hope readers take from picking up your book?
I hope that my number one hope is that they realize that when you start from -0, which is where I felt like I was started, that you can be successful. And it doesn't have to mean you own a business and you have dozens of people working for you. It can be whatever success is to you, whether it's finding that great job, whether it's getting a college education or a high school education, or finding that right partner in life, or finding what's truly meaningful in what your purpose is.
Love that. We all have our favorite. So what's your favorite chapter or your favorite section of your book and why?
I think my favorite chapter in the book is when I interpreted for Marcus, who was a football player at college. It is a big phys ed college in upstate New York, SUNY Cortland. And I think it's my favorite because it was so much fun. I literally cried when he left college because I just had so much fun, and I learned it was something so foreign and so different to me, that when I got the call that they have a deaf football player, and what I interpret, I was thinking, I'll interpret his classes. But he was the starter. He was an All-American. He had choices. He could have been basketball, baseball, or football, and he chose football. And it meant that he needed an interpreter for all his practices, all his workouts, all the reviews of the plays on the field, all the trips that they took. I was there with him all the time. And he was just funny, sweet, great kid. And everybody loved him on the team. And I learned so much about sports in general, and I just gained this huge respect. And they were wonderful to me. They treated me so well. I was the mother and wife who every time football came on, I was like, "Oh my God, please." And I'd walk out of the room. And then I became like, I literally took my son's third grade library book about the basics of football. I didn't know what a touchdown, I mean, I knew a touchdown. I don't think I knew what a field goal was, much less anything else. And I was there front and center and learning and learning and learning about football. And so that was a great few years.
So now you can tell us what a cover six is.
I can.
That's so
And I
fun.
love it. And my sons are grown and I'm no longer married, but I will go anywhere to sit with watch football because I just love it so much. I don't even care who's playing it. I mean, I love the Eagles now, but
That's so good. So tell us what's your personal goals going forward and professionally. What's got coming up on the horizon?
gosh, personally, I'm hoping that I can start working less and travel more. That's something that I really wanted to do. We just hired another staff to help take some of things up my plate. I'm hoping to. I ran my first and maybe last half marathon a couple years ago, but I love the progress or process of it. And my son, my youngest son that lives here, he runs ultras, so he's very encouraging. So I'm hoping to maybe someday not run, maybe at least another half marathon and just kind of, I love going to the gym and I love having that empowerment of being physically fit. So that's important to me. I want to spend definitely more time with my family. And I think professionally, I see a bright future for the language service providing industry. I know a lot of people were like, oh, AI is coming, it's going to take over. But it is really enhanced what we do. The more I learn about it and the more we use it, it really doesn't take away from what we do. So I'm excited to see where that goes and just growing the business bigger and bigger and serving more and more, especially in the deaf community. As you were talking about, it's a very underserved community. When the pastor for the deaf came to our church, one of the things that really struck me and is still true is that one of the places the ADA reaches, and there are over 25 million deaf people in the United States, and that the use sign language, and very, very few, like less than 2% of churches offer interpreters for them. So that's also kind of something that's on my heart, and hopefully that changes.
I'm curious. We have a deaf congregation here that's an older congregation, and they're struggling because they don't have young people coming to church. And they're like, they tell me that young people got left down to associate with them. Are you seeing that there was a separation in age by younger deaf versus older deaf, like in the
I think part of that's linguistic, actually, because the older deaf are using more of a pure form of ASL, where the younger kids have grown up with the internet. They've been on the internet. They tend to be more, I don't want to say signed English, but more of a transliteration. There's a difference between that pure ASL that's been used and more of an English on the hand. As far as the church goes, though, don't see a generational. I see that the younger generation needs to be bought into the social aspect of church. So not just having interpreters in front, and the platform on Sunday morning, but what about the youth groups? What about the pickup basketball games? What about the things that, your youth leader is doing and making sure there's interpreters there for those things? Another thing is transportation. Economically, deaf communities, has had a difficult time because of the language barrier. And so, I was in a deaf ministry where we constantly had buses going back and forth to pick kids up. And sometimes they had to go an hour each way, but where I was pretty rural. But I think bringing the kids in that way.
that makes sense. Yeah, that's very good. So here's my other favorite question to ask my guests. What do you want your legacy to be?
I want my legacy to be that I raise the bar for, as far as my business, I want it to be that I raise the bar for what interpreting services are. And I think we really did that because in the beginning, interpreters weren't vetted very well. And we make it very difficult for interpreters to become part of our roster. We do background checks on people, everything from health screenings to making sure that they haven't committed a crime or they're not on the sex offender registry, that they've got the skill set and the formal education that they need. And that forced my competitors to start to do the same because we were getting customers because of that vetting. So I feel like we've raised the bar on the professionalism in the field. And that the second thing is that I want my legacy to be that the people that work for me find that they had a better place to work, that I paid them better, that I let them have time off to be with their kids, that I made it a nicer working environment for them.
That's really neat. Where can people find your book, The Levers of Success, an entrepreneurial's journey?
So you can contact me. Probably the best place is the website, which is empireinterpreting.com. The book is on Amazon. It's also on the front page of the website, of course. And then I'm on all the social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn is a great place to connect.
Conversation today.
It's actually been a great conversation. Thank you so much for making it so enjoyable. I hope that the takeaway for people today is that regardless of what's put in front of you in life, it can climb over it. There is another side to it, whether it's business or personal, and that they can be a success, whatever their success is.
Well, thank you for what you do. What you do is so valuable and so important to, bridging the gap between sometimes very different worlds. I mean, when I work with the deaf community, they're very not trusting of hearing people, and I think they're probably suspicious. So I'm thankful for people like you who come and bridge that gap of communication between us. So blessings on your book and on your work. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for being a guest on the show.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you so much for having me. It was great.